Nestled high in the Rocky Mountains and broadcasting from the Pineapple to the Big Apple. As sure as the north wind blows and the South Sea flows, the Conspirati Show begins now.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the Conspirati Podcast. I'm your host, Josh, with co-host James, and today's episode is going to focus on Operation Northwoods, a plan by the United States government in the 1960s to basically perform a false flag operation against our own citizens in order to have a reason for military intervention in Cuba. We will be getting to that shortly, but I wanted to call back to our prior episode about the coronavirus and kind of talk to James about what updates have we had since the last week since we recorded the last podcast. World's going to hell. People all over getting this sickness.
They are down with the sickness. That's a fair statement. So, before we launch into episode dose, quick update by the numbers. And again, what goes good on Corona? I've heard some salt, so take a big pile of salt before you take these numbers. But the official numbers are, as of today, February 28th, there are 85,212 cases with 2,924 deaths. So again, big ass pile of salt for that, because I don't know about anybody else out there, but I'm beginning to think we're getting lied to a lot.
But 38% of Americans won't put any salt on their Corona,
God,
right?
No.
Because
that you would never put salt on the source of a virus.
I'm just asking because there was a story that CNN did that poll of Americans, and 38% of them are not going to have any Corona, the beer, out of precautionary measures.
And that's where we're at as a society. But I mean, not to shoehorn too much politics in there, being a neo-prudent Jeffersonian anarchist, I guess, I don't know. But when you look at our current administration's approval rating, 38% seems a bit low. I would have guessed more.
Well, yeah, I think when you have idiocracy spring up amongst us, we just need President Camacho to roll on in and handle business like he did in the movie. Because we're barreling right towards it.
Shit's fucked up, as Camacho says. And again, so just take those numbers that I just kind of gave you. That's within 10,000 from last time we reported those numbers. And I don't know. It seems like a pretty soft landing, given the fact that, again, within 10,000. And then let's go ahead and just look at say like a week. How about a week of trading on the old Dow Jones, like we were talking about last time? For those of you who listened to the last one, you'll know my incoherent ramblings and babblings about the stock market. I was kind of vexed as to why it wasn't going down. Well, hey, careful what you wish for, because as of this week, it's down a fuck ton. I believe that's the clinical term, Josh, is a fuck ton, correct?
It means I have to work another 3 extra years. Yep,
that gold watch is gonna be waiting for you there, buddy. But yeah, it's down 15% as of this week. Pretty much steady drop, 1,000 points per day. And then today, it was down 900 points at one point this afternoon, and then it kind of halted when all of a sudden you start hearing talks at the Fed to step in. And I mean, rates are ridiculously low anyways. And so you're going to cut them down lower to stop this tailspin. I mean, it's like, just appears to me you're throwing gas on a fire.
Well, I mean, could kind of rates work? According to Trump, the media is reporting this, these numbers that you're reading off, that it's all a hoax. That's all political by, mass media and the Democratic Party to to take him down. So he, besides calling it a hoax, which I think he really does believe, that's why he's put his top minds.
Mike Pence is on it, don't worry.
Yeah, Mike Pence is on it. You have former lobbyist for Eli Lilly is heading up the Department of Health and Social Services.
Well, that's it. I mean, nobody knows what the fuck we're dealing with on this, and there's talks in Congress of, will the vaccination be affordable for all of those? Now, Mr. Senator, I can't say whether it's going to be affordable. Like, how about you get the fucking vaccine first? How about we start there?
Well, I mean, they can't even guarantee that the tests will be free.
They're not going to have it. It's years away. You know, and again, there was a guy last week that was tested for the coronavirus, received a $3,400 bill in the mail, and is expected to pay $1,400 of that. So if that's not indicative of our fucking just absolute dumpster fire of a healthcare system here, I don't know what is. Because let me ask anybody listening out there, all 14 of you, if you had symptoms and you were concerned about this, and say, I'll ask half of you first. You have health insurance, but you're not sure what's covered on it, and there's a decent chance that you are going to receive a $1,000 bill for getting tested. Now, are you going to take that $1,000 and invest into canned food and shotgun shells, like the prudent thing to do would be, or are you going to go get tested? And now the other half of you, if you don't have health insurance, are you going to go get tested? Will they test you? And I think that's the crux of the matter, is this thing is nobody's getting tested. Tests aren't accurate. It is an absolute goat fuck. It's absurd.
Well, there's another option, which might be a little bit cheaper for those who are insured and not insured, is South Korea is doing all the testing for free.
Probably get a cheap flight.
Oh, you can. If we left next week, we could. It's $600 from here in the Rocky Mountains. So hop that plane, get tested, right? Come back. Call yourself good.
What if you catch a cold while you're there? Do you gotta go back?
I would go back. They probably would take care of it for you for free.
That's a good point.
They don't necessarily have the pharmaceutical industry running our response to this virus. If you look at the stock market, I think the only companies that were up that were a few of the pharmaceuticals that happened to have some drugs kind of sitting around that seemed to show some promise as a vaccine. I'm glad it seems to be showing up kind of quick, but little suspicious on why they're all ready, and are they just sticking a bunch of people with everything they got, saying like, hey, try this here. Viagra. How do you feel now? Good? Great. Let's move on.
Well, and that's it. I mean, do they even have anything? Probably not. But if we know damn well that psychopathy is rewarded in business, and if I know I can make a quick tweet and have my stock jump 20%, that's kind of hard to turn away from for a lot of these sociopaths. So I don't know. I mean, who knows? But it kind of all proves, I mean, with what we're going to launch into here with Operation Northwoods, I mean, again, I was blown away when I first learned about this, and it's learning about shit like this that brings me to my current predicament where I can't trust a goddamn thing. I want to. I don't want to be this cynical, but when stuff like this is documented and happened 60 years ago, was it?
March 13th, 1962 is when the memorandum went from the Joint Chiefs of Staffs to the Secretary of Defense at that time, Mr. Robert McNamara.
58 years ago. I mean, now think about that. That's not long ago, right? Not long at all. My parents were just getting ready to ruin their life. 10 or so years away. But yeah, this is very, 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 very recent history, and basically what this was, as Josh has already explained, is a detailed plan laid out. So we all know that public support for wars is a finite resource, and you can't just go taking over countries willy-nilly.
Back then, let's be clear.
That's
now,
a good point.
We have enough people that want to bomb brown people to gladly go to war and get their rocks off.
I mean, if Outkast didn't release that song those years ago, every time I see a bomb over Baghdad, I hear that. It's not my fault.
No.
But,
pop culture.
Hey,
Insidious.
it definitely is. It is agenda-driven. That's a future episode. So, Josh, why don't you lay out kind of the scaffolding of this?
Sure. So, like I mentioned, March 13th, 1962, and we'll include a link to the actual memorandum as well in the show notes, but a top secret at that time memorandum, since declassified, was sent to the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, as James mentioned, from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And basically it was a statement of operations, a proposal, a business plan, really, of how to justify U.S. military intervention in Cuba during the time around the Cuban Missile Crisis by having unrelated events. So anything, and James probably get a lot more, and I have some more detail too, of bombings, hijackings, base invasions, all kinds of things being done by Cuban actors as part of terrorist attacks, part of Castro's group moving against the U.S. in order to build that support, as James mentioned, within the U.S. Against Cuba. And one of the interesting things that is in the report was that when it was sent in March, the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to move quickly. They actually had a target of implementing this within a few months. So if you imagine McNamara and Kennedy getting this memorandum with, hey, we want to move on this in a few months. So what, June? In 3 months, 4 months, we want to move on this before the USSR comes to an agreement with Cuba for any kind of defense. If Cuba were to join the Warsaw Pact or decide to put bases out on the island of Cuba, this was being pushed as something to do quickly.
And I think we should probably qualify it too. I mean, not to devil's advocate it too much or agree with these monsters in any way, shape, or form, but I always try to think and, kind of what the fuck were they thinking? And the threat of thermonuclear war across the globe was a very real specter for these people. So what's from our perch, me sitting on my ass in my basement on a couch, like it's, for me, it's easy for me to say these guys are absolute monsters, which, I mean, again, the deeper we get into this, they were kind of monsters. But let me ask you guys out there, if you knew definitively that Russia was going to attack this country and you felt the only way you could save it was by some horrendous act against its own populations, could you justify it? I mean, again, currying that favor and getting the population behind you is a very tough thing to do. And what I wanted to do kind of on that tip and kind of lead it in there. I mean, this whole thing obviously is born out of the Cold War, but as the Cold War kicked off, we had, the Nuremberg trials for all the Nazi brass. Well, at least all the Nazi brass that weren't super good at rockets, but that's another episode. And I want to give you a quote here, and this was during the Nuremberg trials, and Goebbels was being interviewed by General William J. Donovan, and Donovan was really kind of taking the moral high ground on this and saying how awful the Nazis were, which objectively they were, and so on and so forth. But this is one elite talking to another elite, one ruling class talking to another class. And when asked, excuse me, said the people effectively was asking Goebbels, the people don't want war, and then Goebbels replied, well, they can always be brought to war. And when he asked him this is a direct quote from this is actually Goering, excuse me. Hopefully we'll edit that part out. But yeah, Hermann Goering at the Nuremberg trials. And when asked this, how they brought the population to war, he said, quote, "Of course the people don't want war, but after all, it's the leaders of a country who determine the policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy, a fascist dictatorship, or a parliament, or even a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to the greater danger."
And I think we see that today, even beyond just invading another country wise. I think we see it just in our social lives, right? You see on social media that your way of life is being attacked by immigrants, by everyone else. You see the current administration basically out there saying those same type of policies, that we are under attack and they're trying to take away what America was, which has always been a melting pot. But what better way to have folks rally behind you than create that fear of people coming to take what's yours? Just a different form of attack.
Well, and that's it. I mean, just look at the NFL protests, and it was anybody who didn't follow lockstep with the establishment and narrative on that was, what, you hate America? Or anybody who's against any of, the myriad of wars we have going on right now, what, do you hate the troops? Like, no, I can support the troops and be anti-war. Those two are not mutually exclusive. But they take these issues and they distill them down and make them so binary.
And the weird part is that the military is paying the NFL for that military week.
Exactly. And that's another episode. We should probably do that one next, because that's an interesting one. But yeah, I mean, and like I said, I wanted to read that quote just to kind of say that this is well known by the ruling elite. That, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I'd read a book about the Nuremberg trials, and that interview really stuck out with me. So again, I mean, I'm butchering it and paraphrasing it here, but Goering effectively said that, why would any poor slob on a farm want to go to war when the best case scenario is he gets to go back to his farm in one piece? And that's it. So, but again, you get that kind of gears of history cranking. And a good way to do that, I mean, again, what would you do if you thought definitively you were about to be bombed and you had to take over this strategic little island in the Caribbean before the Russians got there? I mean, they're moving nukes in. Khrushchev and Kennedy are on the phone back and forth and this and that. And it's a very heated time. I wasn't around for it, but I can only imagine what that must have been like. I mean, you take the Cuban Missile Crisis. Think about that today. Would it be worse with Twitter and Facebook and the information age, or would it be better? Would we be able to cut through the bullshit? I'd like to say we'd be able to cut through the bullshit, but take the current coronavirus, take really everything that we've seen, the Russia Gate hoax and all that shit. I don't think it would be. I think it would have just been worse. I think that all this information is muddying the waters and making things worse, because now we don't know what to believe. But when you're sitting there and you have a government agency start cooking up ideas on how to basically kill Americans and pin it on the Cubans so we can go invade Cuba and have popular support behind it.
And yeah, I mean, strategically you can see the point of wanting to get into Cuba before the Soviets did, right? Because Cuba's 500 miles, maybe a little bit less, from Florida, so you would have...
I don't even think it's that.
The Soviet, basically, nuclear arsenal parked, an easy drive away from you. So, I mean, you would do almost whatever you could to get the Soviets out or prevent them from coming.
Yeah, and I don't think it's, that part. So, obviously, all of this should be framed in the fact that Operation Northwoods never took place. It only got through to the planning stage, which is terrifying enough if you ask me. But I lived in the Florida Keys, and the place that I lived there had this big jetty that shot out there. It was right on the water, and they trained for the Bay of Pigs invasion on that jetty. There's pictures of it from back in the day. Yeah, but it's not 500 miles. I want to say it's like 100 miles away. Like, it's super close. Like, you could skip a stone, let alone a nuke, and hit there. So the threat was very real. And, yeah, so what's justifiable? Does it fall into you want to make an omelet bucket? I mean, who knows? But, like, the fear that was going on in the between McCarthyism with the Red Scare and just Castro, and they tried everything to get Castro. He survived, I want to say, numerous, well over a dozen assassination attempts. Like, they were trying everything they could to get him, and if this was the last straw, who knows? I mean, what they said in the documents is the desired results. Excuse me. What they said in the documents was, quote, the desired results from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash of an irresponsible government of Cuba, and develop international image of Cuba as a threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere. Well, this thing's a direct threat to us. We have to go in there and take them out.
And what's interesting is that this is a memorandum after Operation Mongoose, which was actually authorized by Kennedy and everyone else, basically to go and eliminate Castro, like you mentioned, and any other communist leading folks, including Che and Raul Castro Ruiz. Both of those guys I know were targets. So this is interesting. This is step 2 after assassination and removal attempts.
Well, it's an Operation Mongoose was proposed. It was 62 as well, and it was basically trying to goat Cuba into. They didn't take the bait effectively. We were trying to provoke Cuba to an attack, or defensive attack, whatever you want to call it, so we could attack them back. They didn't take the bait on that, but it was directed at all, any communist, and like Che was an absolute monster, like a very bad person by all accounts. When I was younger, I fell lockstep with oh man, yeah, walking around with people. I never have them, but people with the shirts on and all that sort of thing. I'm like, when you actually learn the history of it, it's pretty interesting. It's not a good.
It's a cool shirt,
especially if it's Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, I know one of the things I always thought was interesting is that they were going to go in and spray Castro's broadcast studio with LSD just to get him just all whacked out of his gourd and on there broadcasting.
That's the best idea I've ever heard.
Yeah,
that's
also,
fantastic.
I think they're going to do the same, like to the cigars. Just like you said, to kind of devolve the confidence of the people in Castro and everyone else by making him look like a raven loon.
Yeah, get this guy to start tripping balls.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of Operation Northwoods. Again, and you look at the people responsible for this. Like, you just get out there and Google it and start looking at some of the faces. I swear to God, these guys they just look like absolute psychopaths. I mean, it's some pretty interesting stuff. And let's see, what are some of the details on this as far as what was proposed? They talked about.
I got some of them if you don't have them.
Yeah, no, drop them. So,
Guantanamo, which is a favorite base of ours. Some of the things they had planned for Guantanamo, I can't say it right now, was starting some rumors about attacks. So basically going in there doing some pirate radio, right, saying that Cubans are going to attack the base. Placing some friendly Cubans, so I'd imagine the ones that escaped from Castro, helping them basically get over the fence at the base, arresting them, right, that these Cubans were trying to come over and attack the base and the American soldiers there. Some of the other ideas were having some, friendly Cuban-led riots outside, having some damage perhaps to the base and the equipment by tossing some explosives in, having some of the equipment just blow up, right? So that they can blame it on the riots, blame it on some of these Cuban actors, up to sinking a ship in the bay and then having basically a mock funeral, right? So if you can imagine blowing up a ship and sacrificing it, and then having 100 coffins out there of supposedly dead American soldiers that you broadcast back home, you might get a little bit of the old thumbs up from the populace to may go in there and deal with this rogue element, deal with Castro and all these irresponsible members of the government that are killing American soldiers, even though this would all be fake.
Well, and that's it. I mean, it's like the playbook never changes throughout history, and this has all been done. It's just now we have better access to the information. I mean, and like I said earlier, trying to qualify this as to what would you do if you thought war was imminent? Could you justify it? If you truly believed it. I mean, again, you're sinking an American ship with American sailors on it with the intent of killing them so you can get your way and move in and take out the artilleries aimed at Guantanamo Bay and secure the island for democracy. Right? It's pretty scary stuff. And, there's a lot of people that, Kennedy didn't make the move on this. And for all his faults, I think Kennedy was a good person, and I don't say that about a lot of presidents. Especially, I mean, if you consider that if we held the Nuremberg principles, if we held every U.S. president accountable to that, they'd all be indicted for war crimes, every single one of them. But I think Kennedy had seen the cost of war, and from what I understand, I mean, him and Khrushchev, the head chef of Russia, had a direct phone line to each other, and they were talking throughout the entire thing, like, don't do this, we're not doing that. And I mean, you could cut the tension with a knife, I'm sure, but that was under kind of a different time, right? So, okay, the false flag, you can almost justify it. It could almost be justified because of that. And these were different times, and da-da-da-da-da. But what if something like this were to happen in our time? Could you justify it then? Would that ever happen? What do you think, Josh?
Well, I think the question isn't could it ever happen, is when has it happened?
And it has happened in June of 2013. If you look up Operation Timber Sycamore, was the Operation Timber Sycamore. Timber Sycamore.
God, they really love wood for these operations.
They got a lot of wood for war.
That's true.
Is the code name of a covert operation authorized by Obama in June 2013 to train and equip the anti-Assad rebellion, but which actually started in October 2012 when the CIA was operating via Britain's MI6 to avoid having to notify Congress. So I'll say that again. In October 2011, when the CIA was operating through Britain's MI6 to avoid having to tell Congress that it was arming the rebels in Syria, originally the CIA and MI6, which is, of course, British Foreign Intelligence Service, set up rebel army supply network from Syria to Libya, a plan that involved intelligence agencies in 15 countries doing the same thing. staging attacks, and again, leading right up to that whole gas attack. That, I don't know about anybody else out there, but that one just reeked to me. The Syrian gas attack. And that seems like right out of that old playbook, you know. It made no sense for Assad to do that and gas his own people, but if you follow Timber Sycamore back and a bunch of these other operations there, all of a sudden, right before Assad's going to get pretty much exactly what he wants, within a day of that peace treaty, all of a sudden the gas attacks happen. And that's been proven pretty much to be a complete false flag. And we can save that for another episode because there's a lot of interesting stuff on that. And it's not conjecture. It's actually World Health Organization, and all these groups are like, no, it didn't actually happen like that. So,
and maybe my Google foo is less than yours, but from my searching, wasn't Northwoods kind of the first U.S. false flag proposal?
Well, proposal, yes, that we know about.
Right.
But
I mean,
you
like,
can trace this back all the way to the USS Maine.
True.
You know, the sinking of the U.S. Maine at the turn of the century. Like, there's a lot of evidence out there to support, and I'm not going to say one way or the other, that was a false flag. Because they certainly got what they wanted. And for those of you that don't know, I'd encourage you to kind of research that a little bit. The sinking of the USS Maine is a pretty famous event in American history. Just so happened to be in Cuba. Ship that sank in Havana Harbor in 1898. And that was contributing to the outbreak of the Spanish-American War. Basically kicked off the whole war. That's really kind of the first bit of yellow journalism, claiming that the Spanish were responsible for the ship's destruction, because at that point in time, and not to get too fragmented here, but at that point in time, Cuba was under Spanish control, and America had made a statement like that, okay, Spain, you can keep this, but if you ever decide to sell Cuba, you have to sell it to us. Right, and there was a lot of high tensions at that point. All of a sudden, here's this this big Navy ship that, boom, blows up right in the middle of the harbor, and then we get what we want. Spain basically backs out of Cuba, gives up on it, and you know, the American press is really just, it's always been this way. I think it's just, you know, part of what the media does, and no matter it be the printing press or, you know, smartphones. But they really just took that story and ran with it. Or really just the yellow journalism. I mean, again, you're just pushing that narrative. You're exaggerating the facts. You're running these Jangoistic tendencies. I mean, there were people shouting a phrase, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." It became like a rallying cry and a call to action for the country to mobilize against that. So when you say that, you know, Operation Northwoods, I'll say I'll say this, in my personal opinion, it is the first documented one, but it was by no means the first one that this country did have. I believe that the USS Maine was either A, never waste a good catastrophe, or B, false flag. I tend to lean more to the latter.
And that could be true. I'm just curious if, because that was kind of like you said, it's the first recorded one that we can actually have. Here's proof of what we were attempting to do. I guess you say the modern era. And, you know, with that being unclassified, has that led to some of the other conspiracy theories around false flags, which, you know, are less about the military and what we're doing in the military, such as some of the, you know, the bombings in the Middle East of U.S. warships and stuff, but more towards where there are attacks on the citizenry, right? So Orlando, the nightclub shooting, some folks think Sandy Hook was a false flag. 9/11, and 9/11's a big one, right? To ram through that Patriot Act so that way the government could have expanded powers to spy on its populace, make our flights an extra hour long trip just to go through the security theater that is the TSA.
You know, and you look at those two, like the Nightclub, Pulse, and Sandy Hook. Like, I think those are just some broken human beings doing broken human being shit. Especially Sandy Hook, but that it is so weird. Like I don't know if almost with Sandy Hook, like that is to me the most gut-wrenching tragedy I can possibly imagine. It really is. Like, it absolutely just terrible. And then
could the conspiracy theory be folks trying to rationalize all these children being shot?
If you had told
elementary kids,
if all of a sudden the next week you see sweeping legislation get put through or X, Y, or Z, it might lend some credence to it. But as it stands, I just think, like, you know, I see no benefit to it. You blow up the USS Maine, all of a sudden you kick off the Spanish-American War. I see what could be a benefit of that. And when I say benefit, I mean means to an end. But I see nothing that came out. And even 9/11, which I've always thought on 9/11, that's kind of the, from a conspiracy standpoint, that's the one thing I'm just not going to touch, because I don't want to become a 9/11 truther, and I'm an idiot. I know nothing of engineering or metallurgy, but if there's a bunch of convincing videos, which I'm sure there are, I don't even want to start thinking about that. I think, and I've said this in the past, I think the worst case scenario is somebody bursts into a room. Sir, we've got to report terrorists have hijacked planes. We need to shoot them down immediately. And one person in the room says, or do we? I think that would probably be worst case. But yeah, when we know that this stuff does, will, and will again happen, it's like, what do you believe?
And I'm not a 9/11 truther, but you could look at the outcome of 9/11 and you could see where the benefits come. I mean, it could have been, like you said, it's just, you know, taking the spoils of what has happened. Sandy Hook doesn't make any sense because the only folks that would want to do something like that would be, I guess, you know, people that want to ban all guns. So, you know, did Bloomberg pay off a bunch of people to go and do that, or just create a false flag where you have crisis actors?
Well, he only pays people to hang shit on my door.
That's true. No one's come to my house yet, but, you know, it certainly didn't do anything for guns. I mean, you had more come out of the Las Vegas shooting.
Right. And what did we get away with there? Just like ban bump stocks, which we didn't even really effectively do. I mean, again, it's like, if you're out there and you're listening and you're some super pro Second Amendment guy, what are you going to do when the government runs a drone up your ass? You know, and I think the Second Amendment is a incredibly nuanced issue, and I'm not the guy to tell you what to do, but I don't think we should have assault rifles. I think that's a pretty cut and dry issue. I think hunting rifle, I'll even give you pistols, you know. But yeah, when it comes to the big ones, I'd like to see those go away, whether or not they ever will. Again, at this point, like, I can't believe that I'm having to hear about kids having lockdown drills. We didn't have that shit. I was when was Columbine? 93?
Yeah, I think, because I was in middle school when that happened.
I mean, yeah, that was really the first of it. And I think it's what I don't like is how most Second Amendment folks just, it's a mental health issue. Okay, I agree. But I think that's a straw man argument because you know, the individual brain from person to person to person to person to person is so incredibly complex and nuanced, and that's a pretty sticky wicket if you want to try to tackle mental health. Maybe while we're tackling that, which I think we could take away some of the guns or put in common sense background checks. How about that?
Maybe it's you know, corporate forces are funding these, and the pharmaceutical companies are making a ton of money off of antidepressants and all other kinds of drugs for folks that might have mental issues. Maybe they're willing to hire some Blackwater folks.
Well, and Eric Prince has a solution for whatever the problem might be. And for those of you that don't know, I'd encourage you to take a look into Blackwater. They've had their name changed 1,000 times. Every time there's a big dust up, they just change their name. They were Blackwater at first, and then Tiger Swan, I think, or maybe that's a different one. Same thing. Basically, private militaries. Term that springs readily to mind is mercenary. And there was a big dust up with Blackwater in Iraq and some civilian killings. And again, I wasn't there. War is incredibly complex. I wasn't there, so I'll reserve judgment. Where I do get to interject my judgment is when, if you look at the Standing Rock protests, they deployed Blackwater there. And I got a big problem with that. But Josh, I think you hit the nail on the head really when you said it's corporations, because that's all it really is, and that's the big issue I see, is that it is just corporations. They're calling the shots, and they're starting the wars and keeping the wars going on, and it's scary, man.
It is, especially when most corporations, that would be the right word, their revenue depends on people dying, whether it's, the military industrial complex, pharmaceutical companies. Both of those type of companies get their money on the comeback, right? Not the cure. So
right.
If we ended war tomorrow, Raytheon and everyone else, they have a couple other businesses that they're doing. We'll probably keep spying on each other, but they're making their money off of those missiles. The pharmaceutical companies don't want to cure anyone of anything, because they need that revenue of people coming back, getting those pills every month, visiting their doctors who are recommending the pills.
Everything is shifting to a subscription-based service. You're seeing this with media companies, drug companies, everything. It's all going to that, because you can start forecasting revenue based on that, and that's why they're doing it. But I mean, if you look at corporations, and I've often been told that I'm addicted to context, and I got to know why. Well, why does that happen? And you just, as a fan of history, and start tracking these things back. I mean, when did these corporate agendas really come in? And there was a moment in history, and when I say moment, it was a 30-year moment, the 30 Years' War, massive war. I'll give a shiny nickel to whoever can tell me how long it was. So the 30 Years' War kind of culminated with the Peace of Westphalia, and you'll hear the term thrown on Westphalian politics. And the Peace of Westphalia was a series of treaties that were signed in 1648, and effectively what they said is the nation state is the highest order. That's where it all ends. So laws and within the sovereign nation state, that's the highest order of power that we have. Within that realm, certain nation states are more powerful than others. That's undebatable, and that never was up for debate. But the nation state is held to be sovereign. And that's how it was for, 100 years or so. And then, you have corporations kind of get together. You get things like the Dutch West Indian Company and all these groups that all of a sudden start having a lot of money and a lot of power. So by all accounts, and what the common narrative is, that the Peace of Westphalia still holds the nation state to be the highest thing in our current year, 2020. But I'd like to ask you guys out there listening, okay, if the nation state truly is the highest order of things, what's more powerful? Nicaragua or Comcast? Right? And if you're going to think that the corporation is more powerful than Nicaragua, okay, well, that's fine. That's just Nicaragua. Well, how many corporations would it take to be more powerful than our country, being America, or any Western nation? Right? And these things kind of, you saw it start to happen really around the turn of the century, right around the Banana Wars, and United Fruit Company and all that. And Josh, you familiar with a guy called Smedley Butler?
I'm more familiar with Hedley Lamar than Smedley Butler.
Smedley Butler actually won the award for the greatest name of all time. But I just recently learned about this guy within the last 5 or so years, and I was absolutely floored. I'd encourage everybody out there listening to please get a copy of this. You can find it on YouTube. You can find his speech anywhere. This guy was the most decorated Marine in history, right? I'd never heard of him. I'm a big military history guy, gobbled up all sorts of books on Delta Force and Navy SEALs and military strategy, all that shit. I love it. But I never heard of this guy. I'm like, this guy won the Medal of Honor. This guy won the Medal of Honor twice. Holy shit. Right? Well, toward the end of his life, he came out and gave a speech. That speech was transcribed and turned into a book, and it's called War is a Racket. And it is this beautiful son of a bitch out there just absolutely railing on the military and how they are just an armed wing of the corporations. And he was very active during the Banana Wars, which was, again, United Fruit taking over Guatemala, Ecuador, Panama, all these small nations and just bulldozing them using absolute barbaric techniques. And I guarantee if this guy never gave that speech, we have a bank holiday named after him. But he gave that speech and nobody knows about him. If any Marines are out there listening, somebody told me that there's actually a base named after him, and he's very well known within Marines, which is, that's awesome to me, as well he should be. But for civilians, nobody knows about him. But yeah, he held the corporations to task and said, you're just sending young kids to die. And he gave this speech right before World War I, ironically enough.
Well, and then it was repeated right after World War II.
Again, if you look at the dominoes of history and the addiction to context that I have, you take Operation Northwoods, right? Well, how did we get there? Well, we got there because of the Cold War. Okay, well, how did we get to the Cold War? Well, Ostfront, the East Front and the West Front met right smack dab in the middle of Berlin, right? Well, how did we get to that? Oh, okay, World War I. Huh. Well, how do we get to World War I? Oh, a 19-year-old Serbian kid decided to pop a pill in the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It's these are direct lines. And then you can, scale it the other direction from Operation Northwoods in the Cold War. Well, that never happened, but the Cold War gave us Afghanistan. Cold War gave us the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen gave us the Taliban. The Taliban took away our buildings. Taking away those buildings gave us a surveillance state. These are direct lines, and it's fascinating to me to watch how it goes. And it's I almost look at this coronavirus thing and how it's coming down. We are stuck in the gears of history, and this is going to be something that completely flips the board if it gets as bad as I fear it might.
So when we go back, and you mentioned, the Middle East, that's definitely a spot that's ripe for corporate interests. Why
absolutely.
We would be over there. Weapons of mass destruction, remember?
Uh-huh. Well, here's
Iraq
the thing.
had them, supposedly.
1% doctrine. You remember that?
Yep.
We invaded a sovereign nation on a 1% chance. Yet, I don't know. Take a look around. Next person you see hear a cough. What percent do you think that they have coronavirus is? You want to go up and give them a big kiss? 1% chance? No, probably 50% chance that shit's everywhere in this country and we're not doing anything about it. Because interests.
Well, it depends. Just saw on Twitter that in Australia that there's folks that aren't letting their kids be treated by people that have Asian appearances.
Never can be too careful.
Apparently so. And that's one of the things that is a big part of at least psychological false flags, right? Is really trying to bring out your xenophobes,
the lizard
racists.
brains.
What type of social group do I belong to? Am I under attack by these people?
Well, and it's, you said something that kind of got me thinking. And in that same vein, you said the Middle East is ripe for corporate interests, right? Well, take the dumpster fire that is the 2020 election in America. One of the leading Democratic candidates who personally I find to be absolutely repugnant, Pete Buttigieg. Yes. the Pete Buttigieg. He used to work for a small consulting group they called McKinsey, and one of the projects that he worked for them was what to do with the natural resources of Afghanistan. I don't know if that was a Mexican accent, a French accent, or a bad accent. Pretty sure it was all three. But yeah, Pete fucking worked for McKinsey, which, anybody listening, McKinsey Consulting will be an episode. You'll want to make sure you got a nice good vomit bag next to you, because they're probably the worst thing you've never heard of. But yeah, one of the projects that he worked for was what to do with the the resources of Afghanistan. It's like, come on, it's a little bit on the nose.
Well, or up your nose, depending on which part of the resources of Afghanistan you're talking about.
Into the vein. I mean, nothing shocks me anymore, man. Nothing does.
Go right to the opium dens.
There's pictures of U.S. soldiers guarding poppy fields.
Yeah.
We're just now, as of today, which we started on the 28th, it's now the 29th of February 2020, signing a fucking peace treaty with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
When you end a drug war, you want to make sure you have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. But you're talking about the dumpster fire that, is the 2020 election, I think is a really good example, again, of coming back to those false flags that are put into our minds, especially with, social media. One of the biggest uses of a false flag when you're talking about psychological warfare is to be able to pave, a way for a less democratic government to consolidate, right, power beyond just the planned war, that we were talking about before with Cuba. There's also, how do I gain power? Do I keep power? And I think we see that in today's social media. If you just happen to go on to search and type in QAnon, after scrolling through about 2 minutes worth of that, I think your brain will melt. But you have folks there that are literally saying things like coronavirus is an attempt by the media and the Democrat Party to get at Trump, right, to make him less electable in this next election. One would have to ask, why would a reasonable person submit that as a theory or even something that could possibly happen? Trump calling coronavirus a hoax.
Well, and that's it. I mean, that falls back into the kind of 9/11 bucket, and really the thing we see: never waste a good crisis. And I personally am of the school of thought that this thing was created in the lab in Wuhan, and somebody fucked up. I don't think it was let loose on purpose, but it would just make sense to me. I mean, but that seems like maybe applying Occam's razor and Halen's razor. You put those two together and kind of gets you there. But in times of panic and in times of everything, I mean, you look at, like, I would love to see us put like a moratorium on laws in times of panic, like, or
new
have
laws,
them reviewed.
you mean?
Yeah, I mean,
not like anarchy where we just go for the purge during a time of panic, right?
Well, see,
outside of how fun that would be, just from a logistical standpoint.
Yeah, but your cardio's not up for that. A good purge, none of our cardio's up for that. But
that's why we invented guns. That's why we have them.
I mean, again, 9/12. For those of you, I was 20 years old on 9/12. Dude, that was a hell of a day. We were paralyzed as a society, and start railroading this legislation through. Like, can we have a moratorium on it and give 30 days like a cooling off period?
You would think that'd be the best idea. I was also 20, but I was living in Las Vegas at that time, and I remember living next to Nellis Air Force Base and all the jets taking off. But then I also remember on 9/11 and the day after 9/11 on 9/12, just driving down the strip and there being no one there.
Yeah, I went, my 21st birthday was that October. I went out to Vegas to visit some friends that were living out there. There was nobody there. Like, this place is a ghost town.
Yeah, so we probably passed right by each other.
Don't doubt it. I mean, but again, take the coronavirus. Like, I'm going to get pretty cagey if I start seeing a bunch of civil liberties getting stripped away. I mean, what's that?
Start getting cagey now, because there's a lot of concern that, the bill, which should be a clean bill, right? If you're looking at this virus as a thing that we should really be trying to work to save our populace from and make sure everyone's healthy, taking out the cost, would you want to tack on some spy on your own citizens amendments to that bill? Because what the concern is. That's what sounds like is going to happen, that the FBI will continue to have the ability, I believe it's the FBI, continue to have the ability to record phone calls, record us in a mass surveillance state.
And which they have been doing and will continue to do, either above board or below board. I mean, I was reading an article that in China, they're now offering $1,400 if you report your symptoms of coronavirus and test positive for it. Turns out the door prize is probably a 50-cent bullet to the dome. But yeah, I mean, Jesus, how long does that take? And what's that that Franklin quote that's always butchered and is not even his quote? Those who give up liberty for security deserve neither. And I know that's taken wildly out of context, and it probably meant something completely different, but it's true. Whatever it is, I mean, at times of panic, we look for that, and that's what scares me about the current state of affairs. Trump has been acting like more and more of an authoritarian, and when shit gets scary, people want that. We want that alpha chimp there to like.
Well, some people do.
The masses, man.
I think he's personally pulling out that, Kennedy to Khrushchev phone, which is direct out right into Putin's office, and probably asking for some tips.
Yeah, I mean, I never fell for the Russiagate. I said that was bullshit from the start, and it was a hoax committed by the left, and sure enough it was. But I don't know. I do know that the most powerful people in the world all have little phone lines to each other. And they all start kind of calling plays and trying to run things down as it goes. I mean, look at how China handles business. How the fuck are you supposed to be the leader of the free world and praise that type of behavior? Pragmatic or not, how do you condone that?
Well, it's easier when you have business interests. Exactly.
If you're a corporation, corporations only care about stockholders, not people.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever, I don't think anyone would ever look at Trump and say that he cares about anyone. I don't think people would look at his cabinet. We mentioned the Eli Lilly, former lobbyist that is running on Mike Pence's task force to help us with this virus. You also have Stephen Mnuchin. Mnuchin. There you go. He was appointed by old Pence to kind of help out with this.
Oh, yeah. And are you talking about the ex-president of Goldman Sachs, Skull and Bones, Yale graduate, Steve Mnuchin?
Yep. And I would love to know what kind of credentials he is bringing to help with a pandemic, besides trying to ensure that the folks that own this administration are made whole from any losses that they incurred.
Well, that's it. I spent a good 45 minutes trying to Google where Mike Pence went to medical school. I couldn't find anything. It was really weird. Really nothing there. Oh, and you know what he did tonight, as he's heading up this task force, was host a $17,000 a plate dinner
in
GOP
Florida?
Fundraiser. Yeah, that's a little weird.
Well, our only hope with Pence is that he's at least a Christian Scientist.
Yep.
He may not have read anything, but at least, or, God, if they even had someone from Scientology in there, at least we could just bullshit ourselves through the fact that these folks have some sort of, an air quote, of science background.
And what's funny, I mean, the whole thing about this, China appears to be somewhat stabilizing. We about to be fucked. And I want everybody out there listening, all three of you, I'll leave you with this before I sign off. China couldn't contain this thing. and they have the most authoritarian regime outside of North Korea. And if they couldn't contain it, they couldn't stop it, what the fuck are we going to do?
And they're building hospitals in 10 days. Plus, with North Korea, for all we know, the entire country's... For all we know, it started there, and they're all dead. We have no idea what's going on in North Korea.
No, I guess it's... From what I understand, it's really fucking bad there. As you would imagine. They canceled their... the 72nd, I believe, 72nd anniversary of the forming of their actual military parade. They've never missed one, and it was this week sometime, and they canceled it. So that tells you how bad it is. They've never missed that parade in the last 72 years, and they canceled it.
Yeah, no, it does. And I would say they're not apparently taking advantage of this opportunity like folks in the U.S. are taking advantage of this opportunity.
Well, it's funny, man. Like we were talking about earlier, that we're just now seeing it. The Great Panic is here. So if you're listening to this while you're frantically looking through torn down shelves and empty supermarket aisles, just stay safe out there, man. If you can, fucking work from home. Keep your kids out of school. Just give it a week. Just a week.
Well, you gotta keep that machine running. Why would you stay home when it's a hoax?
Polishing the brass in the Titanic, my man.
You gotta look good while you're going down.
Hey, 2 people could have fit on that door. I'm convinced of that. Well, that's all I got, man.
Yeah, so we talked about various things here, and some of those will be future episodes, as James mentioned.
Incoherent ramblings.
Incoherent ramblings. We'll be giving another coronavirus update next week if one or both of us are still here and we haven't devolved into a mad rush for bullets, rice, and water. I feel like those are the 3 things you need to survive the apocalypse.
Don't forget about a mildly homoerotic guy with a mohawk and shoulder pads. You need one of those for the apocalypse. You keep on a chain.
That's true.
Yep.
Yeah. Or I'll just drive around in truck nuts.
Your dog of war.
All right. We really appreciate you listening. This has been the Conspirati Podcast, and we'll sign off for now and see you next week.
Same bad time. Be safe, guys.